All right. Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to another of my used to be the OSR Red Roundup, now the GM Community Roundup. And speaking of community, I've got my first bit of call it viewer mail. Scott, let me swing it on over here. Hey, Gashman. This was posted to, I believe, I guess it relates sort of indirectly. This is a question that was posted just today, just this morning, earlier today. Hey, Ian. I believe it was to my read through of Old School Essentials, but the question is a good one. And of course, it doesn't just apply to Old School Essentials, though. This is mostly an OSR-ish, OSR adjacent question. The question is, Todd, how would you adjudicate it if a thief wanted to break out of sight / perception when a combat broke out so that they could sneak up from behind and backstab an otherwise engaged opponent? The fight breaks out, and they initially seem to be with the group, but with the fighter and cleric charging in, what would be the mechanic to determine if they are successful in dropping back out of perception and sneaking around the melee? I noticed hide in shadows from its movement, which makes sense. So would this mostly depend on move silently? So it's a really good question, and I think there's a few things to, I guess, a couple of vectors that we want to look at, things we want to unpack. I think primarily the first one, and it's hard to say like, oh, here's the universal answer, because I think folks are going to have different answers, especially in the OSR space where they don't spell how everything works out for you. So the first thing is, philosophically, do you want the kind of fifth edition type thief maneuvering to be a thing at your table? You know, dipping in and out of hiding, blep, 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 blep. Like that's built into the balance of your 5th edition thief, is this concept of, okay, they can kind of get in and out of, if not outright, hiding, then at least becoming unnoticed or getting into a favorable position. Basically, I think in 5th edition, right? Every round, I think, as long as someone else is attacking the target, they can bop in and out of the hidden state, or at least, or maybe they just need to have advantage and they're not technically hidden. I don't know, but they can basically get their backstab in all the time. This is kind of built into the balance of a 5th edition thief. How do you feel about that in your OSR or Old School Essentials or whatever version of kind of old school thief that you're running? For me, I don't think I want to do that, or at least not without a ton of fictional positioning. I certainly don't want it to be an every round expectation that the thief can kind of move freely enough to just do this, or that somebody is so out of sorts that they can pull this off all the time. That's not to say that I wouldn't give them some kind of what, or either bonus, either it's by the book, or if it was depending on your book, or if it wasn't for flanking and similar kind of maneuvers. Well, ultimately, fictional positioning is going to be huge, because it's going to depend on, well, where are they fighting? What's the situation? If it's an open room with good lighting and there's nowhere to hide, and everyone sees the party come into the room, and then the thief just kind of moves around the outside, no, that to me would not be enough to give them a chance to backstab. On the other hand, if it's smoky, maybe there's lots of debris or obstacles, and they can figure out some way to kind of drop out of sight, and then do the moving and then come back in, I would probably roll some dice, but it certainly wouldn't be kind of a 1-round maneuver like, the thief and the cleric, or the cleric and the fighter charge in, and then the thief uses in the next, that's the cleric's action, that's the fighter's action, then on the thief's action, they go, I run around the back and get a backstab. Assuming they're not, surprised or what. Even if they were surprised because they're going to see the thief, I wouldn't allow that I probably would say, you can get flanking, and whatever flanking gives you. And I would be open to giving a thief a little bit extra juice on the flanking, by the way. Maybe not a full ×4 or whatever it is backstab. Again, it's going to be different depending on your game, but maybe I might say, well, you might get it ×2, because I'll give it to you that you're a thief and you were in flanking and you're behind them or whatnot. So I might give you a little bit of a rub there. But I know that playing in an Old School thief and having played in a few of them, it's hard to get that backstab, because a lot of things kind of have to be right. And like is noted in the question, if you're going to hide, you can't move. If you're going to move, you're not really hiding. You're being silent, but you're not being invisible. So there's a lot of things kind of working against you. And oftentimes in the situations you're in, you're going to be coming up against guards and people who are facing front. hard to sneak around behind them in a lot of situations. Oftentimes guards, they're in front of doors, they're against walls, they're in hallways, situations in which, as a thief, you go, I don't even have. It's impossible for me to get behind them. Maybe there's maybe I can find a loophole here or there, but it's really hard. I really got to work for that backstab, which makes it fun when you actually hit it. But at the same time, I can see how, as a thief, you want to kind of, maybe you can activate that more. Now, what I tend to say in response is that if you're in a party with a thief and you're in the dungeon, the thief is up front and gets to be, in many ways, the kind of the person who's moving the action forward the most, because they're up front. So, yeah, sure, as the thief, maybe you're not getting what you feel like is your due in combat, or as a GM, you feel like, oh, but doesn't the thief need something in combat? I would say I don't really think so, because like when I was playing my thief, who's really setting the pace moving into the dungeon? I am, because the party can tell me go left, go left. If I decide to go right, the party's going right, because that's where me, the person in the lead, the scout, the thief, I'm going. So I get to set the tone. When we come up to a door, who gets to make the first decisions about the door? I do. Hey, if we run into enemies, who gets to make the first decision over kind of what to do with enemies? I do. We get to a chest, who gets to make the first decision with the chest? I do. I am driving a lot of the action in dungeon, which tends to be a fair amount of the game. So in terms of sort of balance, focus, whatever you want to look at it, the thieves get a lot of things to do. I think in any party I've seen where there's a thief, unless there's multiple thieves, that thief gets to be put in front, which can be scary in its own way, but it is really a driver of the action. So I don't feel the need to say, oh, well, they got to be better in combat. They don't. And I also, or at least from my perspective, I'd say, I'm not sure that they do. And plus, I think the fact that they aren't great in combat means that they're not going to necessarily drive towards combat. If I know as a thief that if we get to fighting, at least by the books and just kind of straight up, I'm not very good at it, then guess what? I'm going to try to avoid it as much as possible, or I'm going to go back and get the fighter, or I'm going to engage other elements of the party. I'm going to engage other things. What can I do to avoid this fight? Because I'm going to lose, or I don't feel like my chances are very good. So I think all those things are kind of valuable. To answer the question, though, if it came up, what kind of things might I do with this thief? I would look for the right situation, and I would really want to read carefully the kind of fictional positioning. Can they get out of sight and potentially hide somewhere? Then maybe they have to sit around, spend a round or two doing that. Kind of what, if you're in middle of combat, how quickly might enemies forget? Maybe I'd have them roll a wisdom check, or maybe even a saving throw to see if they've kind of forgotten because sure, I get it. You're these three goblins and you've got the cleric and the fighter are engaged, and maybe the third one's lobbing. Maybe they've got a sling and they're lobbing slings over, and they're worried about the magic user back there or something else. Sure, in the moment they might forget, were there 6 or were there 5? Think of that scene in the movie Clue where they're trying to count bullets in the gun. And they're trying to count them out. You can lose track, but it would have to be something that it would not be something where I'd have, oh, this is the standard way. No, it was all going to be, for me anyway, depend on the situation. Make some rolls, lean into the fiction. What can the thief do? Oh, you're going to forget. What can they do? What can other party members do? Does somebody have, a smoke bomb that they can drop to help the thief out? Does the cleric have a spell, or the magic user have a spell to help out? So I would really want to engage all of that. And if they can get it all right, then under some circumstances, I would allow it, but it would really be kind of dependent on the circumstances. It wouldn't be my everyday, oh, okay, thief, you get to go around and backstab everybody all the time. Let's see. Null Terminated says, I always took it as a thing that it is supposed to be set up as an ambush. Hide in shadows and move silently from behind, then bam. Yeah, I think that's ideally Null Terminated. That's exactly what it's supposed to be, I believe. Frederick Ork says, the thief is that not politically incorrect to call them a thief? Maybe rogue? I don't know. Rapscallion? Not sure. Ian says, stealth is confusing literally every edition of D&D, even the new 1 D&D playtest with the definitions of hidden and invisible. That's true. It is hard. I mean, it's stealth in like things like poisons, and there's all these kind of somewhat edge cases, though you wouldn't think stealth would be that much of an edge case. It is difficult. And the thief is sort of doubly, because it's like they're rolling actively, but then everyone else in the world is basically that you're playing against the world, whether you're surprised or not. It's just kind of the world rolls dice to see who's surprised, but the thief then gets this active. It wasn't, it wasn't the most well thought out thing, I think ever. I mean, I think it can be dealt with. It's not that difficult, but yeah, I think if I was going to do it all from scratch, I might try to figure out something that would work with both kind of how people are surprised in the world and sort of the thief. Maybe either if I'm going to have kind of the world rolling, then maybe the thief can have a modifier to that roll, and so it stays just that roll versus giving them kind of a skill and then this other thing. It's a little bit confusing. Frederick Ork says, Dimension Door and Blink make backstab be very interesting. Yes, once you get to that point where, I guess, as a thief, either you have a magic user or somebody casting those spells for you, or you get magic items that can grant those to yourself. Yeah, it definitely becomes interesting. I think the point, like Null Terminus said about the ambush, is important. And ambushes are something you don't get every round in combat. You get them once. You get the beginning of a combat, you get the ambush, and then either it's already over or you've got your advantage, and then it's kind of straight up slugfest from after that. It's kind of that one time, oh, hey, you got this thing. And it's kind of the idea with the thief as well. I simply put, though, like an ambush usually, right, you're setting up and somebody's coming to you. You've gotten there ahead of the enemy, and so you're able to hide behind trees or hide in the hills, and then the party or whoever, the enemy, walks down in the valley, or they follow the trail in the woods, and then you jump out. The difficulty for a thief, and oftentimes in a D&D sense, is that you're not the ambushing part. You're not the ambusher. You're often the ambushee in the dungeon, or at worst, you're kind of moving through, so you don't necessarily get a chance to catch a moving target by surprise. Now, you start factoring in wandering creatures, and they could potentially be moving through a dungeon, and maybe you can find a spot to hide, but it's tough because a lot of hallways are just 10 feet wide, nothing but walls and some doors, and there's nowhere to hide. So once somebody comes around a corner, assuming everyone's got the same light sources and things, then it's really hiding almost becomes impossible. I think that if you want to enable more of that gameplay, both in combats and in kind of wandering situations in dungeon, this is your cue to make the dungeons more three-dimensional, make them more interesting. Don't just have bunches of hallways. Have hallways, little alcoves built out, or statuaries or columns or things that can give thieves and other people or creatures places to interact with, because a lot of default hallways, they're just kind of, that's it, 10 feet wide down, and anyone's going to see you from about 120 feet in, and there's nowhere to go. Frederick Ork says, chummers need street smarts more than combat skills in the big city. Chummers. a little shadow run there. All right, so that was that. Thanks for the question. I will respond on the YouTube comments and point you over here for that one. Since with that out of the way, back to the RPG roundup, which I keep wanting to see is RP ground up, which I suppose maybe that's meaningful. Let me give it a refresh here on the hot tab. I've put in if you're on YouTube, I put in the show notes. You can see the link to the subreddit if you want to grab it and put it in your browser, assuming you're watching this on a laptop or something or other, and you want to follow along. I clicked on this. It's just a nice picture. I didn't upvote it though, which I should have. All right, claim this blah blah blah, and I'm on somehow I got roped into the new Reddit. I think I can put that back to old, but I'm gonna see how the new Reddit plays. I know lots of people hate the new Reddit. I'm not a Reddit super user enough to really know if I care about whatever's changed with the old versus the new Reddit. So I'm just gonna keep it as is, and we'll see how that works. Do I need to bump up the size here? Yeah, do that. Okay, there we go. This is a DM Academy question. Does Fireball always blossom to a full 40-foot diameter if it has the space? I would think so. I mean, old school wise, yes. I'm curious. I'm actually curious about this one. So this is DM Academy is great. A great subreddit. I find it, you don't find a lot of trolling and stuff going on there. I find people are very nice, very supportive, answer a lot of questions. It is mostly 5th edition modern D&D centric. So sometimes you have to be aware of that if you're asking a question or giving an answer. I think if they don't say they're specifically playing a different game, different edition, just assume it's 5th edition. So I would assume with this one it's 5th edition. And I'm not so much curious about the answer, because for me, if it's old school, hey, Firewall goes out and it fills up that space, and in fact, I would have it fill out. I'm not sure if the rules say specifically with the old school Fireball if it stopped, but I would definitely have it push out and up. I mean, I know that was definitely fun with things like Lightning Bolt, that it could bounce back and hit you if you weren't careful. But I would definitely tend to do that, because I think that's part of the excitement of spells. What makes them interesting and a little bit outside of your control is that they can have these unforeseen consequences. In the case of this question, which was posted by legendary_new_song, I'm struggling with this, and I don't want to be unfair to my player. He cast a fireball into a room to the far side. The room itself is 20 feet wide, and he was standing in a hallway with the door open at 25 feet. Because there was no room for the fireball to expand away from him, I ruled that it would expand 40 feet towards him. He chose not to use it. At the time, I thought it was the right call, physics-wise, but wait, magic. Bright light streaks from your pointing finger to a point you choose within range, then blossoms with a low roar and explosion of flame. Each creature in a 20-foot radius must make a dexterity saving throw. A target takes 8d6 fire damage on a failed save, or half as much damage on a successful one. The spire spreads around corners. It ignites flammable objects in the area that aren't being worn or carried. How would everyone rule this, or is there already a rule that covers this? Thanks. Yeah, I think what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to pick the point and then 20 feet out. So in this case, it wouldn't go outside that 20-foot radius. So they could put it basically up in a corner, and you would basically make that circle with that point being the center, and whatever's in it is in it. Now, I think I think it'd be great if you had it say, hey, it's gonna fill up at least whatever. If we made a square of 20 feet, I don't know if that's 40 feet or whatever. It'd be great to have something so like, yeah, that energy doesn't just go; it's got to go somewhere. So if it can only go 15 feet, it's gonna or whatever because the wall can't expand both ways. It's gonna blow back. That would be fun, but yeah, I think per the rules, I think it's pretty clear that that's not what it does. It doesn't say the fire expands. It says each creature in a 20-foot radius. So they're not even really engaging with the physics so much. It's like you have that area in flames, I guess. Flames just fill the spaces, burning anything they can. Suit 5 says, spells do what they say they do. Otherwise, you get a pipe, seal one side, and fireball the pipe for a sniper rifle. I suppose that Mr. B78 says, I would amend that to spells do whatever they say they do and nothing more. Gotta also include and nothing less. Yeah. I mean, it's funny, even in 5th edition where they put so much, I think, effort into trying to really write out the spells, you still end up with kind of gray areas. Though, again, I think this one's pretty clear. Like, but, Suit 5 saying pipe and seal on any of a sniper rifle. Well, no one knows. I don't know that we've calculated the strength of the flame and a fireball in terms of the pressure it exudes compared to, say, gunpowder and whatnot. So, yeah, I don't know if that I would necessarily say, oh, that's a thing. But just to the point of probably a good idea in any spell not to really. I think it's great to look for uses. Clever usages is great. Trying to sort of invent stuff out of thin air or mostly thin air about what a spell does, not so much. And I've mentioned before the long discussions I got in with a player over what was it, floating disc, because they just wanted everything under the sun. But and this was kind of old school floating disc, and the spell doesn't say a lot, but it's clear from the context what the spell is for. So when they started trying to push that into getting some kind of crazy combat utility from the fact that this thing is floating, disc is floating around, and it doesn't say how slow it goes or how fast. So maybe it can go like a million miles an hour and slice things up like it's a guillotine. One of those. What was it? The kung fu movie? I forget, the flying guillotine kind of concept. I was like, look, the spell is pretty clear that it's for a magician to carry its luggage on in a dungeon, so you don't have to carry all that stuff. You summon a floating disc and it carries it for you. So it's not going to go that fast because that's not really its purpose. And it's not going to slice into things because the whole point of the floating disc is that it will move around things. Even though it doesn't say it does, I presume it'd be pretty useless if you had to spend all your time guiding the disc. It's supposed to just kind of follow behind you pretty obediently and not bump into furniture. But that's Fireball. Green text. I don't know if I'm going to keep that subreddit in here. As I've mentioned, I'm going to keep tweaking this multi-Reddit to suit Unearthed Arcana. Okay, someone's thing, but I'm not interested. Monster swap. Take a monster, leave a monster. No, thank you. Can cyberpunk be anything else than retrofuturism? I'm going to upvote that. I don't have any answers to that. I'm not sure. I'm not involved enough in the cyberpunk to know if it's got to be retro, or I guess what even cyberpunk means. And I just think of Johnny Mnemonic and things like that. But cyberpunk has to evolve since then, right? I mean, sci-fi doesn't stay like Star Trek just because Star Trek was early or even no, not Jules Verne. Yeah, yes, Jules Verne. No, H.C. Wells or somebody, or Jules Verne. Yeah, Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, any of those guys. It all moves. So why wouldn't Cyberpunk move? I don't know. Some homebrew. Looks like something from that new Rings of Power show, but I'll pass. Oh no, gave up on their dream RPG. That's okay. All right, come on. We gotta have something good here. Bandits Keep. There we go. I'll vote that. RPG generators. Okay, no. Let's see. Oh my gosh. Not being very fruitful at the moment. Ian says cyberpunk equals transhumanism plus anti-capitalism. All right, that sounds like a good definition. I have no idea if that's accurate or not, Ian, but I will take it. I put my trust in you. DM Toolkit. Forgotten Gods of the Forgotten Realms. Hoar. I don't know. It's supposed to be Hor or Hoar, the god of poetic justice. I'll upvote it, but I'm going to skip. We got some Stonehell love. I'll give that an upvote, but then I'm going to skip. The duel. Okay, an encounter. I'll upvote it, but 6 months ago. All right, I'm going to go to new because I feel like I was wondering why I was running into things I feel like I'd seen before. And it's because it's giving me. Don't be afraid to steal ideas from published ventures. That's good advice. I don't need the ability to read it. Steampunk. Hey, this might be interesting. I don't know if I have much to say about it, but I'm interested in these sorts of things. So this is from World Building. Steampunk world building that isn't just aesthetics. This was posted by Luckier Expert. One of the criticisms I've seen people make about steampunk as a setting is the idea it's just an aesthetic, that all you need to make something steampunk is make something out of leather and brass or have it powered by steam or clockwork. And it's something I've noticed with some steampunk media. The Order 1886, a PS4 game from years ago, is my go-to example of steampunk tech just being modern tech but with a Victorian skin. Aside from the thermite gun, which is a nice idea, most of the tech is either souped-up Victorian or World War I weaponry, or just explaining away stuff as Tesla came up with it, such as portable radios decades earlier than their invention in our timeline. This really made me lose interest in the world, especially as its gameplay pushed its magical components, excuse me, such as werewolves and immortality offered to the Order's members into the background, only as sparingly, such as for plot points. The irony is that the steampunk media I've enjoyed the most has either abandoned the Victorian London setting that is so prevalent in the genre, or have really dived into the more fantastical elements that steampunk worlds can offer. The Frostpunk and Fallen London franchises have both leaned into these elements, with Frostpunk being one of my favorite games, although the Fallen London lore is still really interesting for me from my time playing Sunless Sea. I don't have to look far into this subreddit to find plenty of people doing interesting things with a steampunk setting, from fantastical creatures and worlds to interesting technology to stories that delve into issues that were prevalent during the Victorian era, such as classism. So the question I have is, what are the elements of steampunk you wished were focused on over the aesthetic? Either things you have in your own steampunk worlds or ones you've seen from other works. Unfortunately, there's no comments because I really don't. I was hoping to read stuff here. So a couple of interesting things. I am not an expert on steampunk. I mean, I like the aesthetic. I think it's cool sometimes, but I'm not into it. It's not something that I really think, I'm going to have in my game. I really think to a lot of people, probably myself included, that steampunk is basically Victorian, not necessarily London, but most likely kind of England, just because it maybe more than say Victorian era United States or something, but that kind of Victorian English society and cities and I guess landscapes with stuff in brass and leather and clockwork. I mean, that pretty much would sum it up for me. I really wish they would have said a little bit more about some of the stuff they liked. I'm vaguely aware of Frostpunk. I have no idea what Fallen London is. Clearly, it being Victorian isn't just a turnoff, even though they said, I hate it's always just Victorian. But obviously, there's stuff that they appreciate about games set in those Victorian areas, which is the kind of social issues and things like that, like in talking about classism in the Victorian era. I don't know. I mean, I think for a lot of people, that's kind of it, like airships. I mean, I've joked in the past about everything having airships, but I think of airships as a big Victorian thing. And yeah, I mean, looking at kind of tech we have now and saying, now it's got covered in Tesla coils and it's steampunk is definitely a thing. And here I'm going to take some warm tea for the working man. I'm getting over a little bit of a, probably can't tell because I don't think it affects my voice, a little bit of a sore kind of throat-ish situation. I'm all good actually, but it does affect my voice, mostly in just getting like a little tickle like I've just had. Ian says, in people's definitions, they usually forget to include the punk in whatever punk. There are cultural, artistic, and political implications to all of these setting genres. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that's a really good point. Is the aesthetics are the aesthetics, and then what's going to separate your steampunk, cyberpunk, whatever thing. It's interesting that we asked briefly about cyberpunk and now we're in steampunk. Is going to be the stuff behind it, which is actually no different than fantasy or sci-fi, because I really don't think what makes this a fantasy world interesting ultimately is, oh, there's no elves in here, or oh, I've got this, tentacle faced creatures, or PCs, or everybody's made of jello. Like that stuff is, it's great to start, but it's not going to sustain my interest in it. It's a little like, ooh, that's interesting, but you always want, of course, at some point, it's always, well, where are we going with it? What's happening? And I think, to Ian's point, it's all that stuff that's behind that gloss, whatever gloss it happens to be, not just the punk genres, but any of the genres. It's going to be what's behind there. What makes it interesting behind the scenes. When we dig into the meat of it, okay, you've got this nice char on the steak, but let's cut that steak and see how it's cooked on the inside. Those are all those things, as Ian mentioned. What are the cultures like? How are they interesting? Yeah, things about culture, or I mentioned culture. I mean, talking like, things like you mentioned, like artistic. What kind of choices are you making? What kind of questions are you asking? What is it about this setting that is thought provoking? And then, yeah, political things. Are you trying to make a statement? What are you trying to say? What kind of political things you have going on? What are you saying about the world and the way it works in your setting? All that stuff is going to make a big difference. And I think that's kind of regardless of the setting. I think this person is speaking directly to for steampunk, but I think it is applicable pretty much whatever genre you're choosing. Let's see. Audibility of blowing horns and signal whistles. Asking for questions. Nobody's answered. Just use common sense, roll some dice. I definitely think they're useful. I would say this: blowing horns and signal whistles are underrated in terms of kit, especially of enemies, antagonists, the mooks in your dungeon or whatever place that are hanging out. I always try to give somebody in the back's got a horn, a whistle, they bang a drum, they just shout, which just gives a nice tension in any encounter. If it's the PCs, let's say they've been sneaking around the dungeon, this is the first people that they've bumped into. At the end of the round, when they see that someone's running towards the back and got their hand about to scream or screaming, like, can they get that guy before they escape? And then kind of what do they do? I think there are those cues. I mentioned in the stream, yesterday about when you have factions interacting and that having to figure out like who knows what's just happened, how do they know, and how quickly they can respond. In terms of how does somebody know that the dungeon's been invaded? Not just your whatever alarms, but people blowing whistles because they've seen somebody. As soon as the players show up, instead of engaging them, oh, here's combat, they just turn and bolt the other way. All that kind of stuff can help. And if you're wondering, well, how much of the dungeon should be alerted if the goblin A blows his little horn or blows a signal whistle, then just roll some dice. Think out it if you want to do X and 6. If you want to do a wandering encounter check with maybe a bonus to see if somebody else comes out. If you want to just look at what rooms they're in and just use the context, just go with it. It doesn't have to. I mean, the thing is, I feel like with a lot of folks, I'm sure it happens to me too, is you get caught up in trying to be, realistic, but we don't don't know. And it doesn't really matter. It needs to be real enough that it seems like it makes sense. So if you're in the bottom level of dungeon, some guy blows a whistle, and the guy in the watchtower that's 8 stories above them through stone and earth and everything else hears the whistle. If it's not some kind of magic whistle, then it's like, all right, what the heck happened here? But no one is going to call BS if they blow the whistle and folks that are around the corner or a few doors down come out and hear, right? As long as you kind of keep it in, you don't go insane with it. No one's going to argue with you if, what's the radius? How much sound is moved by if I blow this whistle, and how far does it go? And la la la. And is it through wooden door instead of a stone door or an iron door? And no one cares. No one cares. Hey, Brian Smith, and also Brian Smith says verisimilitude be damned. Within reason, verisimilitude within reason and fun. Oh, here we go. This will be good. Upvote. Let's go check this out. This was posted by Antares21. Oh, no, Antares 21 minutes ago in the OSR subreddit. In defense of perception checks, a look at OSR philosophy. Please note that I'm a fan of OSR in general, and much of what I'm saying in this post is intended to spark conversation about how to handle different aspects of the game and the merits of different approaches. Essentially, I'm trying to play devil's advocate to spark discussion. I'm not trying to wage a holy war. I've been running OSR games for about a year and a half now, so I would never claim to be an expert at the quote unquote proper way to do things. And it's entirely possible that the path of logic that leads to this post is paved with my own failures as a GM. That being said, honestly, perception checks and skill systems in general aren't as terrible as people make them out to be. Here's my main thought. When you first discover the OSR or are rediscovering old school style play you had been yearning for, in my case, I started on AD&D before moving to 3rd edition, and over the years of playing different systems and coming into 5th edition, realizing that something had been lost along the way. Another swig of lukewarm tea for the working man. You feel a spark. The thing that often gives that spark is the idea that players should be interacting with the world instead of pulling levers on a character sheet. The idea is beautiful and absolutely worth striving for. To illustrate that beautiful point, however, there are 2 examples that are almost 100% of the time given as the example of where that style of play shines, and they both have to do with the idea of perception. The first example is, of course, moving down a hallway looking for traps. Instead of rolling for perception, you describe moving carefully, looking for tripwires or signs of loose stones, poking things with your trusty 10-foot pole, looking up at the ceiling to make sure nothing is lurking above. The second has to do with searching a room, describing looking under the rug, running your fingers along the walls looking for hidden seams, pouring water on the floor and watching to see if it slips under the wall. Those ideas are amazing. They spark the imagination. They instantly illustrate the powerful, immersive ideas behind old school play, that the player is driving the action through their own attention to detail. But in practice, in my experience, exactly 2 sessions into one game and 1 session into another game with different players at a later date, at some point the player is going to ask a very simple and in many ways very reasonable question: do I have to keep reciting the rote text of basic steps every time I describe myself walking down the hallway or searching a room? Can it just be assumed that unless I specify otherwise, my character is always doing XYZ when walking, and when searching a room, I'm going to look under rugs and tap walls and lick grout to reveal secret doors? That simple question gives rise to a problem. It's a very reasonable request. The player knows what basic things they are always going to do. Is it fun for them to have to repeat them constantly, especially when there isn't going to be something hidden in every single room? After all, some rooms have decorative rugs that don't hide trapdoors. It's still worth describing that there is a rug in the room, even if it's for no other reason than to paint a picture. So then, if we accept, I think he means accept, if we accept that players can create a standard set of rote operations their characters are doing when they quote unquote spend 10 minutes searching a room, do they simply always find all the traps or all the secrets? Or should there be a chance of success or failure? BX/ Old School Essentials rules state that if searching in the correct location, there's a 1 in 6 chance to find a secret door. That's a perception check. Wouldn't it be quite interesting to the narrative of the game if some characters could choose to be more skilled in those? In many ways, I look at where games have gone from OD&D, BX, 1st edition, 2nd edition, 3rd edition, and on, and I see a fairly natural progression. The logic of non-combat proficiency and turning into skills in general gives more options for players to make a character that fits the image in their head that has actual mechanical weight. That's pretty meaningful and in many ways good. After all, every version of old school D&D after OD&D was basically the version before it, but codifying optional rules or common home rules into the core elements of the game. Because as each table fell into certain patterns, it seemed better to give them the tools to do the job rather than making each table invent their own wheel for each problem they encounter. Which is quite funny when you think that one of the main draws of old school play is that it lets people invent their own wheels. All that being said, the truth is, as logical as some of those steps have been, seeing the path from OD&D to 5th edition, each step along the way makes perfect sense, yet something was lost in that process, something vital to the heart of the process of playing the game. So, where's the line drawn? How do you have your cake and eat it too? What is the right way to do things? Whew. All right, so there's a lot in there, and I need another sip of tea here. Gather my thoughts. Ian says, room spacing in a lot of dungeons doesn't make sense. There's the assumption that you fight these 3 goblins, but in the next room there's 5 more goblins, and they aren't supposed to be aware of you. I mean, I think depending on the rules and your guidance, Ian, you roll for random encounters. and such, or you can roll for noise, and sometimes it can depend on what the combat is like. Yes, there's wiggle room, and I think there's wiggle room to definitely be more or less generous, I guess, in terms of what you allow the players to get away with before people in neighboring rooms or other areas come calling. Yeah, I don't think they give any specific guidance. Maybe they do in some module. It'll be interesting to look at some like what was it, Into the Depths? Was it whichever one that first kind of starter, almost teacher module was? Or was it Into the Depths of the Earth, or which one? I forget that one. Or Into the Unknown. Maybe that's it. That was kind of clearly here's a module to teach you how to run modules kind of thing and create modules or create dungeons. Maybe they had some wisdom in terms of what enemies in adjoining rooms are supposed to do, but that's kind of left to the GM to figure out. Though, yeah, it often you do fall into that road of just nobody in the room next to you notices that you're in a brawl, and that's Into the Unknown. Yeah, thank you. Brian Smith says, "Oh, Ian was saying that was pertaining to warning whistles." I got you. Yeah, the warnings and stuff. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is just to hit on that warning whistles. The thing is I like about that, as opposed to they just know, is that it's something that is obvious to the players. Somebody running out of the room or blowing a whistle, that's gonna be an obvious cue to the players that something's up. And it also it creates interesting decision points. Whereas them just hearing it, even if it's makes sense that they would just hear a general Donnybrook, less so. Like that's where I'll rely on the dice. But if someone goes out there screaming bloody murder or attempting to, it gives the players something to try to stop. And then it gives a clear indication of, things are about to go up a notch. Search of the Unknown, not Into the Unknown. Into the Unknown is like that. Doesn't that a song from Frozen? Brian Smith says, ideally, in my mind, the rogue player chooses to play rogue because they enjoy imagining the many possible ways they might search a fantastical space for traps if they can no longer flavor it. Maybe they're tired of the class that checks for traps all the time. I don't know. It's interesting. And then Null Terminated says, to see if the combat makes enough noise without exceptional circumstances, I like to roll D20 under the number of combatants at the end of each round. That's not a bad idea. I kind of like that. So back to this matter at hand. So the perception check issue. There's a few things. So I think one of the things, and it's hard to tell whether this person has thought about this element or hasn't, is that the party, I think ideally, I guess, the party should not be spending 10 minutes at every room or however much time. I mean, 10 minutes shouldn't get you very far in most rooms because it's 10 minutes for 10 feet. So unless all your rooms are closets, nice closets, walk-in closets perhaps, but closets nonetheless, it's not going to take them 10 minutes. And then each one of those segments of time, those 10-minute turns we're using, okay, this is a 30 by 30 room. This is a 20 by 30 room. This is a 40 by 50 room. This is whatever, a 10 by 10 room. All those take those segments. Okay, this 30 by 30 room is going to take you 30 minutes to search. 10 by 10 room, 10 minutes. Every time I tick off one of those turns that you're spending, the wandering monster checks are coming. And then all those other mechanics start to cascade. Like we've been talking about, wandering monster shows up. Oh, not only do they show up, but now maybe there's somebody running, screaming, asking for help, locking doors behind them. Well, that has now created, we've gone from DEFCON 0 to DEFCON 1 can happen. Maybe we're caught in a compromising position. All these things are happening. So you as the party should not be wanting to be just at every room, just being completely, I'm just going to search the whole room, every room. As a GM, there should be enough tension, I think, in the space to say, hey, maybe you don't want to spend all that. You sure you want to spend an hour in this room? And then the party goes, oh my gosh, in a whole hour? Like maybe we don't want to spend a whole hour in this room because who knows what can happen if we're rolling every other round or whatever your cadence is for random encounters, wandering monsters. That's starting to add up. And that's just one room. Then we go to the next room and we're going to spend another half hour. I mean, you're asking kind of for bad things to happen. So theoretically, the party should be a little bit having to make decisions. Is it worth me going and messing around with this rug or this bookcase over here? Or am I going to take a gamble and say, no, I'm going to leave that one alone. I'm going to wait to get to this other room that I think is more valuable. You're kind of making a choice. So so that's kind of the thing that I think. Now, in terms of once you decide to make that choice, do you always need to say, okay, I pour out water, I do whatever? It depends. Like, I can see where they're coming from. In a game that I used to play in, we had basically standard operating procedures, which were these things. We had basically a note card. We could put 4 or 5 things on there, and these are the things we always did. And I've seen that codified in some games. Was it Torchbearer might have had that kind of things I always do? And you could write on there like, I always have my shield up. I'm always walking with my shield in hand. And then if something happened and you were ambushed, you could say, haha, I always had my shield. It's my thing. So I would encourage you to come up with something. I think I would totally do that in a game. Say, yep, you can have that. If you always want to be having your 10-foot pole in front of you, tapping away or whatever, great. Maybe you could say for each player, fill in 3 things you're always doing. And if one person wants to spend all their 3 things on the hallway stuff, great. They want to spend all their 3 things on the efficiency of their searching, also great. But for other times, you may need to make a choice. We got to move, fellas. We got time to check one thing in the room. Do we want to check the bookcase? Do we want to check the carpet, or do we want to check, I don't know, this weird hole in the ceiling? I don't know, right? We got to pick. So we got to pick one, go with it. So then those things aren't just set dressing. They're meaningful. They're making decisions based on what else is happening in the dungeon. And the last 3 times I checked carpets, there were pits underneath the carpets. So stands to reason there's another rug. Maybe there'll also be a pit, or they know there's secret doors in here because they watched somebody go behind escape through a passage that was behind a bookcase a few rooms ago. So maybe they think the bookcase is important. So do that. So I don't want to understate that these things should be, the choices that they make should be meaningful and not just, okay, another room, let's just search it. If your party is ever in a situation in which they can just spend all the time they need to search every room, they either just give it to them because they've killed or run off or scared everybody away, and they have that kind of time, then just give it to them. There's no reason to make the check. Yeah, you guys spend, it's like that take 20 kind of thing. Oh, you guys are going to spend however long to check the room. Great. Otherwise, lean into all these elements that should add tension and add import to which choices they're making. Brian Smith says, is there anything lost in automating play in that way? In terms of, is there anything lost? Well, I think there's kind of 2 ways to do it. There's probably a gain and a loss. I think to the point here, and I've seen this happen, right? There is something tasking if you have to keep repeating yourself. Down the hallway. What are you doing this hallway? Same thing I was doing the last hallway. The first time you're like, yeah, I'm tapping the walls, I'm doing the thing. Next hallway, still tapping the walls, still doing the thing. Next time, I'm doing what I did before. I mean, part of it you can do, like in terms of walking in the hallways, is you set up like, here's what I'm doing. And then I think as the GM, you want to make it a meaningful choice. So they're getting the fact that they're going to basically detect anything or have the best chance of detecting traps. So what is the consequence? They're moving slowly. Say, okay, you're moving from 120 feet per turn. Now you're moving 60 feet per turn because you're taking super care. And then you could just write that in. Hey, we're moving carefully. This is what carefully means. And there's a cost associated with that, which is moving slowly. So everything's taking longer, which means more wandering counter checks. I think that's totally fine. I think you can sort of abstract out the steps, but there's still, the choice is still meaningful. It's not just, I guess, flowery fiction or whatever, right? And you could probably do the same thing if you wanted to do searching. I think so. Those things are good, and they will kind of speed things up. Now, what do you lose? I think you do lose some of the what's the word, of being sort of absorbed in the fiction, of being in the moment, because you're kind of pulled out, right? You're not now these elements that you might have been looking at, like, oh, the rug. Is there a pattern on the rug? Do I notice? Does it seem to be threadbare? Does it seem like any areas might be discolored or anything like that, right? You're not doing that work anymore because you're just going into like auto search mode. Here's my card. Okay, right? So you lose that being kind of in the fiction. But the onus is also on you and the GM to have interesting things. The other thing is, and we said this before, right? Don't make a dungeon with 100 rooms if you can't fill the 100 rooms with stuff that's interesting. If you're just room with rug, room with rug, room with rug, and you don't have enough in there to support observing those rugs, well, what's the pattern on this rug? Can you tell me something about it? Does it have these things? And you don't give yourself enough information either to come up with it on the fly or develop it, then maybe don't have the rug in there or don't have the room in there. You know, I'll have as many rooms as you can really flesh out and do stuff with. Don't just throw in rooms just to throw in rooms. And maybe if you don't do that on top of these other things, you can get to a point where everything that's in there, your party's going to know may be meaningful. Might not necessarily mean that every rug has a hole underneath it, a pit underneath it, but every object has some kind of intention. Maybe even the intention is just being a rug. Does that make sense? In terms of the perception checks, I think the thing is that gets people with it is that it just ends up being both. It when you say like I have a perception check, I mean, you know that kind of and granted, I've always said like players should never call out their own check, so a player should never be saying I want a perception check or I make a perception check, but they should be saying I look around the room. But you get to that point where it's kind of code. Players not saying I want to roll a perception check, but they're saying I look around the room because they're waiting for you to say, oh, looking around the room, that's a perception check, right? I think the thing is with that, one, it just becomes it's not, you're not interfacing at all with the world regardless. It's just that roll, and it's also that kind of spammy thing of like, oh, I make another perception check, I make another perception check, oh, my cousin makes a perception check, oh, the wizard makes a perception check. And so you're trying to avoid that kind of just leaning on the number without doing anything. I think you could play, and many people do, play a game like 5th edition that has perception and still pushing players to be descriptive, whether it means perception just is very basic until you actually start to examine stuff or move things aside or whatever, and then you get maybe bonuses to perception, or you get new perceptions, or you use passive perceptions, whatever you do. Like there's many ways to kind of solve for that, and some folks, you know, don't mind it so much. But I think ultimately there's probably some balance, I guess, right, in all these things. But I would say if everything seems intentional and there are really risks and consequences for doing actions, and the players should have reason not to just flippantly throw their actions around. Oh, every room we're going to search completely. You know, this probably then your dungeon's not tense enough. Make, you know, the amp up your ticking clocks, whatever they may be. If you feel like your party's just walking around like they're tourists, just examining everything that they can. Hey, Jackal. Jackal says, I get annoyed when players just roll dice without me asking them first. I absolutely. And it's even worse when they roll a die roll, and then I want to ask for roll later, and they're like, but can I use that one? It's like, no, pal. Not going to work for me, pal. You rolled it before I asked you to. You should have waited. Ian says, I searched the room versus I searched the bookcase looking for loose books. One is more likely to need a roll. Yes. Oh, that's the other thing I actually had on my mind to say, and I probably forgot about it. But yes, that's the other thing, is the fictional positioning should be helping with the rolls or obviating rolls entirely. If there is a hidden door behind the bookcase that is activated by pulling a book down, and you go and you thoroughly search the bookcase, I'm not going to make you roll if you discovered it. You're going to be messing around with books, and then it's going to open. Whereas if you don't do that, if you do I searched the room, then you're looking for all those little signs that are just maybe obvious from a distance. Is there discoloration on the floor or scrapes or anything, right? But much lower chance that's the roll. I think that's the other thing is reward. Like they used, I don't have time on stream to look up in BX what BX says, because they make a statement. I'm not going to say it's not true. I just don't remember, and I can't stop everything to look it up. But what was their statement of BX? OSC. It was, hold on a minute, where was it? Oh, here we go. That if searching in the correct location, there's a 1 in 6 chance. I don't know if that's totally right. You know what? Maybe I will look it up. Hold on a minute, because I happen to have BX right here. Let's see. What do they say? I am in. This is just my. I show it to you, but you can't really see anything because it's inside a folder. Because BX had those nice hole punches. Well, actually, there you can see it as I'm looking it up. Oops, sorry, as I banged my folder into the mic. Let's see. It would probably be under adventuring, which is B18. I'm not saying this person's wrong. I don't remember all the rules, and often I kind of do my own thing sometimes, so I don't recall. Beginning the adventure, organizing the party, figures, time, movements. Let's see. We're talking about secret doors. No, yeah. Let's see. Okay, so here's what they say about secret doors. I don't think they're wrong, actually, but they we'll read it and then we can determine how if there's anything we want to add about that. So this is on page B21 of the BX. Secret doors. A secret door is any door that is hidden or concealed. A secret door usually does not look like a door. It may be a sliding panel or hidden under a rug. We have a lot of stuff hidden under rugs today. Any character has a 1 in 6 chance of finding a secret door. Any elf has a 2 in 6 chance. The DM should only check for finding a secret door if a player says that the character is searching for one and searching for one in the correct area. The search takes 1 turn. Each character has only 1 chance to find each secret door. So, yes. So that is your basic chance. So they are correct in that you have to be in the right spot and then you have it. But I would probably I think I play with a little bit. I guess I just like my own kind of house rule is I will definitely usually give it away. If you're in the right spot, then I think I'm gonna give it to you. So yeah, they are correct. 1 in 6 chance, 2 in 6 chance for elf. But I generally play a more. I guess I'm more generous. I'm a more generous man. So there. Everyone who thought I was a mean, horrible GM, here I am being generous for finding secret doors. Ian says, and to use the D20 mechanic, different intentions might require a 20, a 15, or a 10, depending on the specificity rule. It would still require a roll to find the same thing. Yes. So, it's kind of funny, actually, looking at the BX thing. This is one of those things that I think kind of highlights the difference between sort of old school and OSR, because, yeah, the old school approach, as is also in old school essentials, because it's basically copying basic expert, is that even if you're in the right place at the right time, you still got to roll that 1 in 6 or 2 in 6 if you're an elf. But I think the OSR wisdom, which at least for this one, I think most of them I am, but for this one, I'm definitely in agreement with, is forego the roll. Your players are in the right spot, doing the right thing. Reward them if there's something they're there to be rewarded for, because oftentimes there's going to be nothing. So when the oftentimes they find it, reward them with it, reward their ingenuity, and not force another die roll, because all that die roll does, especially in this case, is you only have a 16%, 16 point whatever percent chance, even if you're in the right place doing all the right things. And that's something I think kind of the modern OSR would skew towards allowing the players and taking it, whereas the original old school one was like, I don't care what you did, you're getting a 1 in 6 chance, pal. 2 in 6 if you're an elf, but you ain't no elf. So there you have it. It's an interesting. I want to read some of the comments because I'm curious to see what folks. I'm going to hit the refresh just in case some more folks chimed in here while we were reading. Ooh, let's see. Rorinlian22 says, regardless of what system you are playing, the rules should ultimately always be adjusted to the specific needs and desires of the table. There is no quote-unquote right way to split the difference because no one method is going to be right for all groups. It's the job of the DM and the players and not the rule book to make these calls. Oh, yeah, okay, that's true, Ryan. But man, it's a little bit. Could you make a less decisive answer there? It's kind of could be, but maybe it's always up to you. Sure, make a stand, Roaring Leon 22. They've got some replies here. So Mega Tapyrus says, "Yup," and you can indeed split the difference too. If the players want to say they're rifling every drawer and slitting open every mattress from that point on, I can go ahead and mark off the time it takes, and tell them what, if anything, is found going forward. At the same time, singular or otherwise unusual dungeon features can still be given that zoomed-in treatment. Managing these sorts of things is a dynamic art, not a static science. Read the room. If the players are bored and progress is slow, adjust. And then Intaris, who is the OP, says, I think this is where I've been really trying to get things right recently. I definitely struggle at times with balancing the players feeling tedium over meticulously combing over a bunch of rooms I know to be empty/meaningless in an adventure with only the threat of random encounters to add something meaningful, versus providing too much lenience with empty space and causing significant rooms or/moments to feel obviously too significant due to the extra attention given. I've often looked for recorded sessions of things that I've run so I can compare how other people are running things, but I feel like I've come up dry of good examples. I think one thing, Antares, is don't have a bunch of empty, meaningless rooms. I mean, rooms can be empty, like there's nothing currently in them, though there should be something in them. But if you're getting to rooms that are meaningless, maybe, just maybe, you should not have those rooms in your dungeon. And if you're using a third-party module, and they've got a bunch of rooms that are just empty, meaningless, and they're just kind of there because they felt like they needed to fill a page with dungeon rooms, then, sign of poor dungeon design, number one, and then two, consider changing it to remove those dungeon rooms or update them, tweak them to make them meaningful. Terrence, you made it. Ian gave Terrence the welcome to the party, pal. Yeah, good old Die Hard. Brian Smith says, searching in the right place, then maybe success equals finding the secret and getting to choose to trigger it or not. A failed check means you trigger it accidentally. I mean, you couldn't. So the rules just you either find it or you don't, Brian Smith. I would be totally fine if you wanted to tweak that rule to you're in the right place, you're searching, roll the dice, will determine if you are able to control as you say, the triggering of the thing versus not. That's actually a really interesting way to look at it. I probably want to tweak those odds though. 1 in 6 for it being kind of uncontrolled. Maybe I'd make it 50-50. Maybe 2 in 6 for non-elves, 3 in 6 for elves. I don't know. I mean, it probably depends on what failure means. I wouldn't want it to be because finding a secret door should be a good thing. It's a positive. So, but yeah, there's a difference between I found the secret door and I know how to open it, but I haven't opened it yet. Versus you're just shuffling books, you hit the right trigger, and the door pops open. You could have some fun with that. You could totally do that. Now, the rules as written, raw, as they say in BX, for example, does not specify that that's what you're doing. But I would be completely happy if that's how you wanted to run it. It would be a good tweak. I think that would be an excellent tweak to the find secret doors. And then, for the elves, I would say they can find secret doors without having to search the right area. Right? They come into the room and they're elven. If you're playing with that kind of elf, they're, elven eyes. They're able to pick out some finer details that others miss. All right. Boston 123 says, I run world/stars without number. And in that rule set, a dungeon turn is 10 minutes. Pretty much every action from moving from room to room stealthily to administering first aid after a fight to picking a lock, etc., takes 10 minutes. If you want to auto succeed on something, that is fine. It will just take 10 minutes. Another tick of the clock till a random patrol finds you or your lantern burns out, etc. I will skill checks when the PCs are rushing something. If you are creeping along a hallway trying to be quiet and spot things along the way, sure, you can spot the tripwire automatically. If you're running down the hallway away from an enemy, that is when I have you roll a spot check to see if you glimpse the wire as you run. And then Antares replies, I've also been running Worlds Without Numbers, and that's where I've ended up as well in my ongoing game. I like Worlds Without Number a lot. I feel like in general, it gives a nice blend of freedom and options for players. That being said, I still sometimes struggle with the right balance of having players interact with the world versus the smoothness of narrating over large chunks of empty space. Maybe the real problem here is the large chunks of empty space. No reason you have to have large chunks of empty space. No reason. Ian says, never understood why elves could find hidden doors in stone but not dwarves. Yeah, it's a weird thing. I always felt like dwarves didn't quite get enough love for them being so heavily connected to rock and stone, but then elves would get this kind of freebies underground, which doesn't even really fit in the kind of classic D&D lore of the elves and their love of woods. I don't know if it's a Tolkien, the keen eyes of the elves. Does Legolas in Lord of the Rings ever spot something hidden underground that everyone else misses? I don't think so. I'm rereading Fellowship of the Ring, by the way, and I'm just got past the Council of Elrond. So we've met Legolas now, and he has yet to eye something from afar and figure it out. But if I can run across a bit of the text that mentions him being able to find a secret door, does anyone find a secret door in Lord of the Rings at all? I don't think so. But anyway, if they did, I'll pass it along. I mean, the thing is, Ian, is D&D kind of became its own thing, right? It started off as this amalgamation of all these different creatures and settings and everything from the classic pulp and otherwise fantasy and sci-fantasy sources, and then it became its own thing to where you get to 3.5 and it's no longer about D&D elves being sort of these other elves put in the game. It's their D&D elves, and so D&D elves that have been established over so many years have had these properties, so they always have them, and we kind of forget, where do these come from again? Why do they have these things? It no longer even matters. Eric Diaz, DOTD, deal of the day, maybe? I think this is a matter of quote unquote shades of gray, not black and white, or what I call role playing versus pixel bitching. E.g., I searched the room for treasure, would find nothing. I searched the statue's eyes or examined the mermaid statue, would automatically succeed. I examined the statues for something strange, would generate a perception check. Ooh, I like that. Maybe we need to go check out this article. I think I will. How are we doing on time? Oh my gosh, I'm already at the hour. Oh, good gravy. All right, let me see. How long is this? All right, it's not too long. I think this is really good because I like that a lot. I'm going to drop this into the chat. We are at the methods et madness blogspot.com. This is from, it's not super new, but it's not super old. From 2019. So it's methods at madness.blogspot.com /2019 /02 /perception -check -roll roll ROLL playing versus.html. You will see it there on your screen. Now I'm hiding it so that my face isn't covered up. Ian says, I think this comment's referring to the older point and click adventure games where you had to have to click on a specific pixel to find the solution. Yep. That is totally the reference as I understand it. And that was highly annoying. Oh, I did that again. Highly annoying when it used to come up on games. Let me just blow this up a bit. Okay, so this was posted by, what's the name of the Eric Diaz, DOTD. Perception check, roll, ROLL. I've been lost again. All right, hold on a minute. What did I do? How did I fix it? What did I do? Stop the video. Stop the video. Last time this did it, right? There we go. Okay. I don't know why it does that in there. Some time ago, I wrote about social roles. All right. I have little interest in this discussion because I am. Oh, hold on a minute. Wait a minute. I want to skip over the social role stuff. Should you roll to find hidden things or carefully describe where you're looking and how you're doing it? Again, this is a matter of degree, not black and white. There is both player skill and character skill. Let us try one example. There are 6 statues in a room with a painting, furniture, etc. One of the statues, a mermaid, has a single and valuable emerald eye, but this is somewhat concealed by darkness, painting, etc. I searched the room for treasure, would find nothing, no roll. I searched the statue's eyes or examined the mermaid statue, would automatically succeed. I examined the statues for something strange, would generate a perception check. Being extreme either way will lead to situations commonly described as roll, ROLL playing, or conversely, pixel bitching. For example, if you enter the room and say, I roll to find treasure, this is a classical role play. You are not interacting with the contents of the room, just with the mechanics of the system. This will simply not fly in my games. However, if a player is suspicious of the mermaid statue's eyes or just the face, and specifically examines it, asking which eye is typical pixel bitching. Unless the PCs are pressed for time, examining one statue's face would be enough to notice anything out of the ordinary. Other examples. In a dungeon with 30-ish rooms, one PC searched for secret doors on the floor of the one room that had a secret door on the floor. Automatic success. Sorry, I need a little more tea here. 2. Playing Curse of Strahd, one PC tested a suit of armor to see if it would animate. It didn't. A few rooms later, there was another suit of armor. Nobody tested it. No perception check. The PCs were unaware when it attacked. By the way, Curse of Strahd is an awesome campaign full of clever twists like this. 3rd, upon seeing a large library, a player asks if there is something worth taking. Perception check to find a useful book or insight, etc. Once again, the truth lies in the middle, as it often does. For example, one of my favorite modern games, Dungeon World, has a discern realities move that comes to mind. However, even in Dungeon World, you're not supposed to do straight role-playing. You can't just stick your head in the doorway and discern realities about a room. You're not merely scanning for clues. You have to look under and around things, tap the walls, and check for weird dust patterns on the bookshelves, that sort of thing. However, the example in the SRD contains a PC finding newer and bent parts in the wall without any direct reference to his or her actions. Namely, I take out my tools and start messing with stuff. I pull candlesticks and tap the walls with my hammer. And Dungeon World has certainly many bits that indicate this type of role-playing, including, for example, the possibility that you can find a trap / monster / trouble in an empty room if your roll is bad enough, even if it wasn't there before you roll. But not all GMs use such methods. In any case, since this isn't black and white, you can certainly play Dungeon World in any way you prefer. Okay, so I like this. I think this is a really great compromise, right? If you give no details, I searched the treasure. Unless there's literally a treasure chest that's in the middle of the room, you're not going to find anything. Why? Because you haven't given any details. You have not interacted with the world yet. And as the GM, you're saying to the player, I need you to interact with the world before I to do something, right? In order to trigger some kind of mechanical anything, I need you to actually interact with the world. Saying look for treasure is not really an interaction. And then if they do interact with the world and they interact in a way that matches a thing in the world, then you don't hide it again, right? The pixel bitching part is there's one statue, one eye in the statue's face that's matte, that's a ruby, and the other one's painted red. Maybe if you just eyeballed the statue from across the room, you wouldn't notice the difference. But if you go and say, you know what, I look at the heads of the statues, or even just I check out the one statue close, and that's the statue with this gem in it. Don't force them to be like, oh, you did the left eye, but not the right eye. Or I'm going to roll behind the screen to see if you check the right eye or the left eye. No, you just, okay, at up close, you got close enough to it, you have it. And then if you get in between those two things, being kind of right up in the spot or being totally removed from the fiction, you do engage with the fiction, but in a more general, unspecific way, then you can make some kind of determination. If we were to take these examples and put them in an OSR sensibility, that 1 in 6, 2 in 6 chance would be if they kind of generally were interacting with the world, but not specifically. Whereas if you get specifically up to the statues and replacing statue, would say a secret door, the secret door bookcase, and they actually get up and personal with it, then they're going to find it. If they're just like looking around, but just more generally, then they're going to get a roll. And if they're not doing anything, then they don't get anything. And I think that's a really good middle of the ground solution. It will encourage players to do something, but it's really up to the players. If the players don't want to get granular, then they go with the dice, and they'll be lucky or they'll be unlucky. And if they want to be granular, they will be rewarded for that. And they'll know that, so they can decide for themselves, do they want nothing, do they want a chance, or do they want certainty? I think that's good. All right, folks. Well, somehow we managed to get through a whole hour as usual. As always, it's been a blast for me. Hopefully it's been okay for you. If you give a thumbs up on your way out, that would be awesome. If you feel like subscribing and you're in here and you're not subscribed already, that would also be awesome if you feel like it. Otherwise than that, have a great rest of your day, night, whenever you end up watching or listening to this. Have a great weekend, everybody. I will see you next week. Game on, and I will talk to you later. Bye now.